In today's program, we'll talk about how Connecticut is addressing climate change, net zero emissions by 2040, focus on renewable energy, NEVI program, and much more. And my distinguished guest is Katie Dykes, Commissioner, Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. This is Abul Islam. Welcome to my podcast, Bridging Connections. Climate change risk is one of the most complex challenges of our time, profoundly impacting our lives and livelihood, economy, and society. Aftershocks of the pandemic, war in Ukraine, geopolitical tensions, rapid social and technological changes are headwinds towards a resilient and sustainable future for our built environment. The new normal is uncertainty and unpredictability. In today's program, we'll talk about how Connecticut is addressing climate change, net zero emissions by 2040, focus on renewable energy, NEVI program, and much more. And my distinguished guest is Katie Dykes, Commissioner, Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Welcome to my program, Katie. Thank you for coming. I'm going to read a little bio for our audience here before we go into the discussions about you. Katie Dykes is the Commissioner of Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Since 2019, she had previously held the position of Chair of the Connecticut Public Utilities Regulatory Authority and served as Deputy Commissioner at DEEP. She has spent much of her career involved in regulatory groups such as the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative and served as Deputy General Counsel for the White House Council on Environmental Quality and as a legal advisor to the General Counsel for the U.S. Department of Energy. She is a graduate of Yale College and Yale Law School. Welcome again, Katie. So let's get on with these topics here. Okay, so the first one, I'd like to get your input. It's a lot of items together. Is this what is the plan for our state? For the 2040 net zero, and how renewables are going to be. They are not yet a big part of that goal of 2040. I mean, around the world and everywhere, we have renewables in the fringes, 10% or less. Mm-hmm. Even that's the case in Connecticut. We're all working towards the goal, but how it's going to happen by 2040 with regard to whatever plans you guys have or the governor has for our state?
Great. Well, first off, I'm so excited that we're having this conversation today because, look, Connecticut is a leader in tackling climate change. We've been passing laws and developing plans and supporting investments in clean energy for decades. Actually, our renewable portfolio standard was first enacted in 1998. And we've been updating the ambition of that law, as well as we passed a law that commits the state to reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 80% across our economy by 2050. And then just a few months ago, the legislature enacted a bill that Governor Lamont advanced, which commits our state to achieve 100% zero carbon electric supply by 2040. And we've gotten a lot of questions of how are we going to actually achieve that? And the good news is that we have been working hard to develop a plan for achieving that goal. It's been led by our Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. Connecticut's really fortunate that about 10 years ago, the legislature had the foresight to integrate energy and environment under one roof with our department. So we are working hard on developing plans that are achievable and to shift to clean energy, and also figure out a way to finance it and to get it permitted, which is another really big challenge you hear about lately. So, under Governor Lamont's leadership, We have made historic investments in renewables. We've got about 710 megawatts of grid scale solar that have been procured already and moving through the pipeline. We've been investing in energy efficiency for decades, and that helps to reduce the total amount of renewable energy that you need to procure in order to achieve a 100% carbon-free grid. The governor has also led procurements that have for offshore wind. And all told, we have contracted for over a gigawatt of offshore wind resources that are going to be supplying Connecticut's energy needs in the latter half of this decade. That's about 20% of the electric supply equivalent that's consumed by Connecticut residents and businesses. So that's a really big deal. Those projects have contracts, and now they're moving forward in the development phase. And we're really excited to see those move forward. In addition, we've helped to prevent important facilities like the Millstone nuclear facility from shutting down prematurely. Nuclear has a really important role to play in how we achieve a decarbonized grid, and we have the largest nuclear generator in New England here in Connecticut, in Waterford, Connecticut. And it was in danger of shutting down prematurely a few years ago. But under the governor's leadership, we were able to bring them to the table and negotiate a contract to keep that plant running. If it had shut down prematurely, we would have seen greenhouse gas emissions increase by about 24% across all of New England, not just Connecticut. But that's a huge step backward at a time that we really need to move forward. All of these different resources I just mentioned are part of the portfolio that we need to expand in order to achieve that day in 2040, when we hope that all of our power needs 24/7 will be supplied by clean energy sources.
Great. The second part of this question is, again, the cost associated with that. And everybody in the lead news in our state with regard to the cost of energy going up. And for the short term, hopefully it's the short term towards that long-term goal of having lots of renewable sources and having them work, reality. I know the investment have been there, with the New London, Massachusetts doing a big investment on the offshore. We have solar, and we have a big equation as the Millstone plant, that the energy generated. It's renewable. It's not whatever the definition of the nuclear energy is still,
right.
But it's still helping us.
Emission-free,
yeah. Emission-free, but to meet our goals. So, what do you think would be the cost situation? I know it's not going to be, it's going to be costly in the short term. People are, in our state and many other states with energy crisis, energy costs going up, and every other commodity is being impacted by the cost of energy. What is the short-term plan with regard to having a control on the cost of electricity for rate users, residential and commercial, and long-term goal with regard to bringing renewables into the mix?
Great question. And in fact, when Connecticut first enacted our renewable portfolio standard 2 decades ago, one of the reasons that it was put in place was not only to achieve environmental goals like reducing air pollution from fossil fuel power plants or tackling climate change, but also to have a buffer against a lot of volatile energy prices that are driven by the price swings that you see for fossil fuels. So it's really interesting at this precise moment that we're talking together to reflect on the cost benefit of renewable resources, because here we stand today where Connecticut ratepayers are preparing for some significant increases in the cost of their generation rates. And it's fully driven by the geopolitics and volatility of fossil fuel prices. So the war in Ukraine has disrupted energy markets and created enormous demand for natural gas and other resources in Europe. And New England and Connecticut we don't produce fossil fuels here. We import them from other parts of the U.S. And in that sense, we're directly in competition with Europe for those fossil fuel resources. And that's driven an enormous spike in energy costs because the price of natural gas is directly tied to the price of electricity in the New England market. And so we are truly in an extraordinary moment right now of seeing very high energy prices driven by our choice to rely on fossil fuels in our power grid over the last couple of decades. And amazingly, the one of the most important tools that we have at our disposal in this moment to help lower prices for ratepayers are the profits that we're making on the renewable and nuclear contracts that Connecticut has signed over the last several years. For when you think about it, all of the costs associated with developing a renewable facility, whether it's a wind farm or a solar array, are upfront capital costs of constructing and developing the project. But after you get it commissioned and integrated into the grid, the fuel is free, right? There's no cost for solar or the wind blowing, and so in that sense, you have a lot more predictability around those marginal costs of those kinds of units on a going forward basis, and that helps to buffer from electric rates and electric prices from the volatility and unpredictability of fossil fuel spikes. So we're actually generating over $100 million of profits on our Millstone nuclear contract, as well as profits on some of the solar contracts that are already performing, and we are cycling all of those profits right back to ratepayers. So that's one example of how renewable investments and nuclear investments are helping to protect us against fossil fuel-driven energy spikes. But in addition to that, your question about how are we going to build out the quantity of renewables that we need to meet our goals, and how are we going to do that in a cost-effective manner? There's two things I would highlight. Number one, federal support, and two, competition. So just a few months ago, President Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, historic legislation on this, driving billions of dollars of investment into clean energy, among other things. And those federal dollars are going to be impacting the cost of renewable projects most directly through tax credits that are now available, generous tax credits from the federal government that will help to lower the cost of renewable projects developed in the years to come, as well as investments, direct grant investments that are available from the federal government now for things like transmission. We need to build a massive amount of renewables, but also a massive amount of transmission to be able to plug those clean energy resources into the grid. That will deliver a lot of benefits to ratepayers, but it can be a costly upfront expense. And the Department of Energy, for example, is now offering competitive solicitations to help buy down the cost of transmission investments. Batteries, a whole host of different grid enabling technologies are being subsidized and supported at the federal level. So that's really helping to bring down the cost. And then the second item is competition. I'm a strong believer in leveraging competition to get the best deals on the projects that we need to build. Back in 20 years ago, Connecticut had a fully kind of monopoly regime that was governing, where the utilities were the only ones who could build generation in our state. And we chose 2 decades ago to move away from that and to rely on competitive markets in order to source the power that we need. And I think that's a really important principle that needs to be applied towards how we invest in renewables going forward. So over the last several years, DEEP has been in a leadership role in running competitions, running RFPs on behalf of ratepayers. We've seen robust response. Every time we've run an RFP, whether it's for solar or offshore wind or storage or other resources, the prices are always, surprising. That we see these technology costs coming down, and we're able to lock in the best deals and the best benefits for our ratepayers. And I think it's really important to continue to have that aspect of competition especially to enable ratepayers to get the best deals, as well as to incent innovation in developers who are bringing these projects forward.
Yes, I know. One of the things that we all hear these days about the refinement and sophistication of battery storage technology, especially with the wind farm. So how? What is your thought on that with regard to the battery, the continuous improvement worldwide, everyday progress happening from any of the storage devices, innovation, and holding the power for a long time, not just the sporadic wind and all that. Is that something that we are trying to promote through your department with the federal grants and all that stuff that, promote businesses that will be competitively investing in those things anywhere from the world, from the United States and other areas too?
Absolutely. The example of storage is a great one. We have been including storage in our renewable procurements for some time to make sure that we were all of our RFPs were open for developers to not only propose, say, a solar farm, but also to be able to bring us a proposal for a solar farm paired with battery storage. And we've seen some really exciting projects move forward. The key with storage is that it's so versatile, and it can solve a lot of different types of problems that we have on the grid. And the key question is to make sure that we've designed our procurements or designed our energy markets to make sure that we're incenting the use of storage to solve the problems that are the most pressing for us. So, for example, in the summertime, when we have a problem of summer peak, right? That on a hot day, late in the afternoon, the air conditioning load is kicking up, and we can see the power demand really soar. But usually just for a short amount of time, right? Maybe the period of an hour or two or three in the late in the day. And so storage facilities that can come online and that can, charge up at night and then discharge to the grid and help to shave that peak and bring that peak down can provide enormous value. But that's a great application for the kinds of storage technologies that have a charge and discharge period of a couple of hours. But we have a different problem in the wintertime here in New England, and that's a problem of cold. Sometimes we have a cold period that can last for a couple of days, maybe even a week. And during those cold periods, a lot of the power plants that have been built by our regional grid operator run on natural gas, but we don't have adequate capacity to supply for all those power plants to be able to get access to gas that they need to run reliably during those periods. And so we can head into a cold winter stretch of weather and find that, half our power plants can actually run. That's when we need alternative resources, especially clean resources, to be able to step up. A battery that can operate for a few hours may not be able to fully fill in the gap in that kind of a multi-day period. But long duration storage technologies are improving every day. It's been really exciting to see some of the federal government and venture capital supported investments in R&D for long duration storage starting to reach that commercial viability stage. And so we are excited to see some proposals coming forward for multi-day storage technologies. We just announced that we're going to be doing an RFP for storage, and we're excited to see what developers will bring forward that can help us solve not only those summer challenges, but also those winter challenges that we have on the New England grid. And I think there's other technologies that are on the horizon as well. Green hydrogen has the potential. There's a lot of discussion going on, a lot of activity around hydrogen at the moment. One of the applications for green hydrogen that's been discussed is its ability to provide for that kind of backup generation need in existing gas turbine power plants that could be running on blended hydrogen to perform during those cold winter periods, for example. So there's some interesting, of course, it's important to compare the alternatives, but that's where a well-designed RFP can, again, leverage competition to help us identify the best solutions to move forward and in a very exciting technological space.
Very good. Now, my next topic of discussion again is the electric vehicle program, the NEVI program. The Connecticut DOT has made a commitment to put 150,000 charging stations by 2025, and DEP has got to do a lot with that too. Also, So I'd like you to talk a little bit specifically about the plan, the infrastructure, siting, and permitting for that 2025, because the electric vehicle industry is moving very fast.
Yes.
From Mr. Tesla or some of the few Chinese companies 3, 4, 5 years ago, and now everybody's into the big three is also producing electric vehicles in the United States, big time. So are we ready for the infrastructure?
I'm ready for it.
Right.
Have you driven an electric vehicle? Are
Yes,
you an EV driver?
Yeah.
What's your experience been? How do you like it?
Very good. But the restriction on the limits, 250 or 300 miles,
Yes.
That scares a lot of people who haven't used that one.
It does,
yeah. The charging capacity.
Yeah, they're a lot of fun. So I drive a Nissan Leaf,
Yeah.
and we've had it since 2019. And so I have a short commute.
Yeah.
Most of the trips that my family takes are, in town, like near a grocery store, Little League field. And you suddenly realize 90% of our driving is within, easily within even a limited battery range, and making that shift mentally over to thinking about how you fuel your vehicle from, going to the gas station once a week or what have you, versus plugging it in at night, sort of like your iPhone, right? That's how you think about EV charging. And so the first step we needed to tackle was to make sure that we're helping people get access to charging at home, because we want most people to be doing their charging at home overnight. That's when the grid can best handle it. The Utility Commission, the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, has been a great leader in this space, and they've directed our electric utilities here in Connecticut to offer rebates and incentives for their customers to be able to install chargers at home. And so you can, in some cases, the rebates will match the total cost of installing a new charger at your house. But you just have to call the utility to find out how to enroll. So that's step one, is getting access to at-home charging. But then we have to deal with those trips that are longer, right? And where you do need to charge up in the middle of the day. And that's where the NEVI program comes into play. We know that this is one of the number one concerns that people have if they're on the fence about whether to purchase an electric vehicle, is where am I going to charge? And we have to end that range anxiety statewide and frankly across the region. And we're just delighted to see the federal funding that's coming forward from the Biden administration through the bipartisan infrastructure law that's enabling our Department of Transportation to install the chargers that we need on those major arteries, and that will give people that reassurance that if you need a charge, it's going to be available. Of course, Connecticut's also been a great leader here too. And last summer, Governor Lamont signed a new Connecticut Clean Air Act into law, which is providing significant support and funding to help us provide incentives for folks to be able to purchase an electric vehicle. You can access those incentives through, the program is called Cheaper. And it's available through all of your dealerships, and you can, for certain models of vehicles below a certain MSRP, you can be eligible to get approximately $2,500 off of the sticker price, and that, coupled with new federal tax incentives that are available for EV purchases, is making EVs more affordable than ever. Our Cheaper rebate is also income sensitive, so we want to make sure that no matter what your income level is, if you're looking to purchase an EV, that it can be affordable for you. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation with EV charging, right? We need to make the EVs affordable And then we need to make the charging available so that the range anxiety doesn't deter people from purchasing an EV. But we also know that the more vehicles are on the road, the more EVs that are on the road, the more private companies are then going to be investing in providing EV charging stations. Because the private investors need to know that there's going to be sufficient demand and utilization of their chargers, right, before they can invest. So I see this initial funding from the Biden administration, it's transformative funding, but I think it's also going to accelerate the business model for even more private investment in charging to be available statewide. So we're really excited to be able to support that from the department's standpoint.
Great. Now, one of the afterthought about the charging station with now we suburban life, we live in our house and we have a garage, we can plug it in. But then there are urban areas, 6-7 large cities, apartments,
Yes.
residents, and all that. And there are economic disparities, disadvantaged areas too. If they can afford a finance electric vehicles, base level and all that, where do they get the charge if they're living on the 6th floor of the apartment and all that in any of the
Right.
cities, Bridgeport, Hartford, Waterbury, New Haven, you name it. So what is it? This economic disadvantage society is part of the income level comes into the play, how we are addressing that with that. Any thought on that one with regard to?
Yes. It's this is another one of those parts of our charging sector that we've been very focused on because we know that for folks who are renters, if you're in a condo association or a multifamily building,
Right.
you're not going to have the same ability to install a charger
Right.
that you would in a single family home. So actually we were able to advance legislation that provides for a right to charge for folks living in condos and apartment buildings. So check the law because there's been some new updates to give renters and tenants more and condo dwellers more ability to ensure that they can get access to charging and remove barriers. And then in addition to that, we've been supporting funding through the Volkswagen settlement funds that were allocated to our department several years ago. And that funding is directed, we're really working with a lot of municipalities to provide more access for public charging. That could be public charging at public locations, or it's been great to see some really innovative engineered solutions to charging in public spaces. There's a company called EVSE LLC located up in Windsor, a great Connecticut company, Connecticut entrepreneur who's been really leading the way in manufacturing EV chargers. I visited there last year with Secretary Granholm, who's really excited to tour some of Connecticut's innovative manufacturers. And they've developed a design of a charger that can be installed on a utility pole on the street with a retractable charger that can be, with the push of the button, can be lowered down to the street level. Wow. And so, there's important challenges that we need to overcome here. One, of course, having the funding to be able to deploy these chargers, ensuring that we're supporting the affordability of electric vehicle purchases in the first place so we can create demand for charging in our urban communities. And then 3, entrepreneurs and engineers are coming to the table with great ideas about how to design these chargers in these public spaces, to ensure, for example, you want to design your charger so you can, minimize any possibility of a snowplow coming by and clipping it or,
absolutely.
safety,
Safety
challenges
issues,
and so on
right.
and so forth. So I just love telling that story because, there's amazing leaders right here in Connecticut who are helping to engineer and solve for those challenges. And that's going to be critical to provide access to EVs everywhere. And by the way, having access to electric vehicles across the state in every community is something I'm passionate about, not just for solving climate change, but also for addressing air pollution. Because those very same communities that we're talking about are urban communities where we many folks are renting or may not have access to charging. Those are the same communities that are bearing a disproportionate burden of air pollution because they live next to our highways and interstates and next to light industrial zones where there's elevated levels of air pollution, maybe 20% higher than in a suburban or rural community. And the asthma rates track that disparity. We're a state that's paying over $100 million per year. Our citizens are paying to manage health costs associated with asthma. We have some of the Some of our cities are in the top 10 list of cities in the country where it's most challenging to live with asthma. And there's a direct connection from air pollution, from transportation and vehicle exhaust to health impacts and asthma rates. So that's another reason why I'm so excited to see the advance of electric vehicles for tackling climate change, providing for more affordable transportation options, but also helping to make our air safer to breathe for our kids and families across the state.
Beautiful. And it's certainly 2025 is much earlier than 2040, so we can do that in a couple of years with the these charging station infrastructure across the whole state, urban areas, highways, of course. Arterial roadways are the major first target with regard to establishing those stations too. But it's just very important to take care of the people that live in our communities and the health issues that you just mentioned about the particles and the air pollution and that right by the highway for those communities.
Absolutely.
And that'll go a long way with regard to addressing that rather in a short term, rather than waiting another.
It might not be the first thing on someone's mind at the car dealership about
Yeah,
a reason
exactly.
to choose an EV, but you can feel really good every time you're riding in a passenger EV or even taking a ride on one of our new transit buses that are being shifted over to electric. We have about a dozen electric transit buses that have been purchased by the state Department of Transportation. Other municipalities are making great strides with the funding from the US EPA. Many municipalities in Connecticut are shifting over to electric school buses. And we're also, for the first time, providing an incentive through the state's Cheaper program for electric bikes. So there's a whole host of different transportation solutions that we're shifting away from fossil fuels and over to cleaner sources like electricity. And I'm thrilled about what that can mean. So next time you're riding on a quiet electric transit bus or commuting in your EV, you can feel good about what you're doing to reduce asthma rates across Connecticut.
So good to hear that, Katie. Absolutely. Now, next topic is about the resiliency. We had many storms over the last severe storms. Everything gets shut down, including the power, and we will have another one pretty soon. We don't know when.
Yes.
So, are we ready for that with regard to resiliency for the next storm and mitigating its impact? And it all started with this Public Act. That was 12-148. Microgrid program and all that. So protect us. A big part of the resiliency of our state for natural events, sometimes very bad or even catastrophic natural events. How protected we are with regard to that storm. The next, as based on our experience in the last couple of them, Sandy and many others that came in after that.
We can't predict when these storms will happen, but we can predict that they will happen and they are getting worse. And that is, Connecticut's climate vulnerability, one of the most important aspects of climate vulnerability for Connecticut. As a coastal state, we are, frequently impacted by tropical storms, hurricanes, and these can bring coastal flooding. They can bring intense windstorms, and of course, we're also the 14th most forested state in the country. A lot of people don't know that, and so our power system, our distribution lines are vulnerable to outages associated with downed limbs that can occur in the wake of these different storms. So. And in addition to that, we also are experiencing other types of climate impacts that can intensify the impacts from storms. So, for example, we're seeing more frequent droughts, as well as more intense precipitation events. Over the last 2 years, you can think of, the storms where we've seen several inches of rain falling in a short period of time. That means that climate impacts are not just coastal, but they're also affecting inland communities that can be overwhelmed with flooding. And then from the standpoint of drought, in a heavily forested state, having a few months of no rainfall or low rainfall can really weaken and make our forests more vulnerable to invasive pests and other types of disease. And then if you have a storm that comes through, that can mean even more tree failure and impact to our infrastructure. So you can see how all of these things are intertwined. And if that's making you feel a little anxious, well, the good news is that we've been working hard to improve our planning and our infrastructure investments to try to more holistically approach and address and mitigate some of these climate impacts. So in 2019, Governor Lamont expanded the role of the Governor's Council on Climate Change. It's been really setting the pace for climate policy in the state to tackle not only reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but preparing communities to weather the impacts of climate change. I love that you talked about the microgrids program. A lot of people don't know Connecticut had the very first statewide microgrids program in the country. And we've invested in several microgrids around the state, lots of different configurations, and a lot of lessons learned. These microgrids are tying together loads around a critical facility. It might be, for example, down in Fairfield, we have a microgrid that's tying together a local high school with the fire station and other emergency response. In Hartford, we have one that's tying together a senior center, a library, a grocery store, a gas station. And so where you have some of these critical facilities that are in close proximity to one another, a microgrid solution can enable you to tie them all together in a little tiny grid so that if the big grid is down because of a storm or a reliability event, that on that site, that collection of facilities will have on-site power and can run 24/7, 365 in island mode. So this is really important from a reliability perspective. The microgrids program is a direct response to the major storms that we had in 2011 and 2012 that caused, week-long, 2-week outages for folks. And now we're looking at how to expand the learning from the microgrids program and to incorporate that into our climate resilience planning that we're doing today. We just are closing around $10 million of technical assistance that we've been providing for Connecticut municipalities to help them hire consultants and grant writers and engage the community to identify the next tranche of projects that they want to seek funding for. And we're looking forward to then standing up a climate resilience funding program that can help then provide seed funding for those projects to advance. But I'll just say, I think again, it's one of those insights of having an agency that includes both energy and environment. So I'm really excited when I see our planning and our investment bring forward holistic projects that can include protecting, let's say, a wastewater treatment plant that may be in a low-lying area, helping protect it from inundation, from flooding,
right,
but also providing for backup power on site. Many of the wastewater treatment plants in the state are relying on diesel backup generators that can run for 72 hours. And then what, right? So if we can think about how to bring clean, reliable backup energy sources and fund them as part of holistic projects that also help protect against flooding and other types of precipitation events, that's the kind of holistic approach that we need to best prepare us for the next storm.
This microgrid is a very powerful concept if it really works across the whole state, from centralization of energy transmission to decentralization, and allowing that thing will bring reliability to communities that are affected on these big storm events, and they will not be shut down completely. You need to see more of those, examples. Like you said, you're pretty heavily invested with the municipalities. $10 million is not a chump change, with regard to them, telling us how they can be self-sufficient in the case of the storm emergencies with regard to power. It's a great program, and if one success story you have with certain communities or municipalities, that can be taken to the next guys over the whole set of new municipalities and communities that can also follow the same the concept, not just the generator concept that'll run out in 3-4 days a week and all that. if that lasts for days in and out, in any of the storm situation.
Absolutely. I think that's what we do well in Connecticut. We have 169 different towns, across the state, and we're a home rule state. We have no county governments really to speak of. And so to some folks, they might look at Connecticut and say, oh my gosh, this is so unwieldy, all these different municipalities to work with. But actually, I've found that good ideas and good models, once one municipality launches it, it can be very contagious. And we can, in some cases, having this structure makes us more nimble because municipal leaders are able to bring together the community, work with developers, and motivate good projects to move forward. So that's what that's something I've learned on the job, is the importance of working not only with legislators but also with municipal leaders to drive investment in good projects. And look, we talked about electric vehicles and electric buses. I mean, think about that. Electric school bus could not only be a tool for getting our kids to school in a way that's exposing them to a lot less air pollution, but it also, if you can plug those school buses into the grid, they can provide power back to the grid at a time that it needs it, or they could even support some emergency charging functions that might be needed during a storm outage. Right. So it's really an exciting time to be working on decarbonization and climate resilience, because our innovators and engineers are bringing us all these new types of technologies, and it's inspiring folks like me who are working in government, doing planning, to really stretch to make sure that we're leveraging all of the different functions that these new technologies can bring. And to help communities prepare for and be protected against emerging crises and challenges like climate change. So it's really exciting.
Absolutely. Now, you did touch upon that. My next topic was on, of course, as a business model, renewable industries as a business model, and the initiative taken to really promote and accelerate businesses internally within the state and outside the state from worldwide to attract companies, talented people to really push the renewables. You did touch upon that, but I'd just like to hear a little bit more with regard to the financing of that. You did mention about the Biden's recent announcement, President Biden's about helping the states and municipalities to really do that. How it will happen, with the funding-wise incentives on the part of the state with regard to turning around, not just the solar companies and a couple of wind farms, of course, is big, Norwegian or Danish firm will come in and establish there. And, we have seen the size of those, the wings over
Yes.
there, right, in the offshore wind and all that. That's heavy engineering, big time.
Yes.
But other than that, what other incentives to promote renewables as an emerging industry in Connecticut would you say that the state has plans or is planning on?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, it's important for us to have predictable procurement opportunities that developers can rely on, so that as they're looking to invest in training up a workforce and doing all of the project development legwork that has to be done before you can get awarded a bid, folks need to know that there's going to be a pipeline of opportunities, and know when those procurement opportunities are going to be coming. And so we know that we need to build a lot of renewables in order to meet our goals. So first off, getting that 100% zero carbon target enacted in Connecticut law, I think is really important to show developers and investors in the space, as well as workers who are considering a career change to shift into renewables, that the demand is going to be there. And then next, we need to be clear about when the opportunities are going to be for bids for new projects to come in. So this year, for the first time, DEEP issued a procurement plan that said, here's all the different RFPs we're going to be running this year. And we wanted to do that so we can signal to the market when the demand is coming, and so that people can get prepared to be able to bid in. And then beyond that, we need to make sure that we're providing support for job training, for workforce development. I hear this at every level with every industry, that folks are really challenged to find talent, especially to work in emerging areas. And yet we have so much amazing talent here in Connecticut. So under Governor Lamont's leadership, he's launched an Office of Workforce Strategies that has been just phenomenally successful in deploying programs like the Career Connect program, which is providing for workforce training supports to enroll folks who have not worked in these industries to get them the skills that they need to be able to work with developers and entrepreneurs here in the state to deliver these projects, whether it's energy efficiency and air sealing and weatherization in a home, to installing and doing maintenance on turbines out in the open water. There's so many jobs, so many opportunities, and we're working hard to make sure that we're supporting folks to get the skills that they need to be employed and thrive in these emerging sectors. So those are a few that we're working hard on. And then streamlining the permitting process, ensuring that there's more predictability around the projects getting not only financed but actually get to the development stage and implementation stage. And so we've been happy to play a role at our department in helping to bring the best practices possible towards minimizing conflicts in the siting and permitting process. For example, over the last couple of years, we launched a blue plan for the Long Island Sound. We know that there's a lot of potential to bring transmission lines to connect offshore wind farms to our power grid, but that will require those lines to traverse sensitive marine environments, such as in the Sound. And we treasure the Sound. It's like one of our, the jewels of our state, and it supports a lot of aquaculture and fishing and recreation. And so we were able to do a whole study to map where all of the different sensitive resources and uses of the Long Island Sound are, so that we can put that in front of developers who are thinking about building energy infrastructure, and so that they know the places that would be the least challenging to site a line, so we can avoid those conflicts. Those are the kinds of tools and best practices that we want to dramatically expand, so that when developers get a contract and they're proposing, drawing a line somewhere or a project in this location, that we've done the good work to engage communities to get the buy-in and make sure that the projects that we need to decarbonize our grid are being being targeted for suitable locations. So there's just so much to do.
Absolutely.
But these are a few of the things that we've been really working hard on.
Yeah, you touched upon a very important topic of workforce development in Connecticut. And this is, as being a board member of CBIA, we just talked about it last week, how critical the need is with regard to not just the engineering school graduates, UConn and Central Connecticut, and that's hard to find even at the entry level. But then there are kids that are graduating from community colleges, that can be, adapted to this industry with job creation. But we need a state to take initiative with regard to those programs. While this renewable industry is developing, I'm not talking about, the offshore oil rig guys. They are the one who puts those blades and turbines.
Yes.
Very specialized expertise. We can develop that over time. I'm not saying that we have to train all of our people to do some of the stuff that is very, very complex in, putting those foundations for those turbines, putting the turbine blade over there. All the nuts, big, huge nuts and bolts. I'm sure you've seen it, We all get excited
remarkable.
as engineers,
Yes.
Those are not easy jobs, but we can definitely create some opportunities in the solar and the transmission and battery power for many of the high school graduates from urban schools, because we can't find them. We can't have H-1B. There's a limit, federal limit to hire from other countries for 3-year duration
Right.
of all that.
Right.
We tried all of that as businesses, and it ties very well, would tie very well into opportunities in the renewable industry and aligning them with our own people in the urban, especially in the urban communities, who
Yes.
don't get to go to the 4-year colleges and all that.
Absolutely. And I'd love to say more, if you have more you can say in terms of what specifically the state can do, because I think everyone is seeing this challenge and opportunity. We're so excited to help connect. I mean, it's amazing that now we have, our policies that we've been leaders on in terms of addressing climate change for years are also, I think everyone is finally realizing that those same policies can be an engine for economic development and employment opportunities. And so we're it's exciting to see that acknowledgement kind of shift. We have the federal funding that's coming that is just lighting this industry, this sector on fire. And now we urgently need people at every level. And like you said, it's not just doing the really sophisticated work on the offshore wind farms. It's thousands of electricians that we need to be able to install EV chargers that we were just talking about a moment ago. And these are opportunities not just for hiring a trade worker, but also for business creation.
Absolutely.
And I know talking with many legislative leaders, especially who've been champions of turning things around for many of our cities, that everyone's so eager to connect our underserved communities, not just with jobs, but also with a path to how they can start a business, whether it's an electrical, as an electrical services or weatherization, helping to make our homes and our buildings more energy efficient, building out solar arrays, installing many of the climate resilient infrastructure that we need to protect our communities. There's billions of dollars of investment and not enough people to do it. And so we're eager to be part of that solution.
CBIA and I have been with many of my clients and associates have been for the last 12 years. We've gone to the high school at the senior level and inspired those kids to pick up engineering as a career and all that. And we ended up hiring some of them by giving internship, and they're working for us. Mm-hmm. So private industry, not just my company, are already doing. They're not even they're going below the community colleges,
yes,
right at the senior year in the high school, and saying which kids are motivated to pursue a career in construction inspection, weatherization. You mentioned, electrical, elective as an electrician with some training,
mm-hmm.
But the connectivity between the high school, the community college, and the state government,
yes,
and the private industry has to happen in a more organized manner,
yes,
with regard to that. And then we'll unleash the potentials of these folks that are coming in and help to bridge the gap that is happening in the trained workforce in Connecticut.
Agreed. And I think it's, like you said, getting involved early. So, making investments in STEM education, or most recently legislation to teach about climate change in schools, I think is really important to help kids understand at the earliest, in their earliest years, why these jobs can be so rewarding and exciting. And then also thinking through, are we investing in the training capacity in our communities to work with local community leaders and groups who are best positioned to help connect young talent into workforce development programs. So we have to invest in our partners in those communities as part of these efforts. And being, we have to acknowledge the barriers that people are facing as they're trying to, feed a family, pay for, while getting training into a new job. If you are asking somebody to take on, setting aside time to take on education in a new trade, do they have the assurance that the job is going to be there when they're done? A lot of people cite the lack of transportation. That they just physically can't get reliable bus service or don't have a car. And so even getting to the training facility, let alone to a manufacturer or a job that might be, out in a suburb, if we haven't listened, we have to listen to what the barriers are that people are telling us about. We have to then look to provide dollars in places that they may be lacking. But those barriers can seem so simple, and yet they can be so challenging to overcome. But I know if we are listening to communities, working with our community partners, we will really transform lives. And we can't solve for or deploy the infrastructure that we need to without the workforce
Absolutely.
necessary to get there. So I'm excited that we have great partners like CBAA that are eager to be continuing to work on this, and I know our department is glad to be a partner in this.
This is so good to hear that. We already know how important transit-oriented development and being on the DOT side, and with regard to the rails and the buses, the rail line that we are working, our firm is working on that, along with many others, Windsor Locks, another train station that is happening. And those are the transit-oriented monies that we need to emphasize now, just not building plain highways like the old times. That will help alleviate this transportation problem.
Yes.
Hopefully between cities, between job centers and residential centers in urban areas, so they don't have to buy a car and they can become productive and get a good paying job in the industries that we're talking about, renewable industry. So transit and oriented development and transit related investment goes a long way in addressing that commute for workers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So the last point of I have, you have spent quite a bit of time with us. I appreciate that. Any comment on the hydrogen and fuel? You did talk about that, what is the potential in Connecticut for hydrogen and fuel cell technology?
Well, Connecticut's been a leader on fuel cell technology for years. We have, Fuel Cell Energy and Doosan and others that have been part of Connecticut's leadership on this technology for many years. We're one of the few states that has included support for fuel cells in our energy incentives for some time. In the bipartisan infrastructure law, the federal government announced $8 billion of funding that will be available to spur the development of hydrogen hubs across the country. And fuel cells, as technologies that can electrolyze and create hydrogen, are poised to really take off with this dramatic federal investment in hydrogen. Connecticut DEEP, we are proud to be joining with our sister states in New York, New Jersey, and elsewhere in New England. We're working hard as we speak on an application to the Department of Energy, to the federal government. We want to see a hydrogen hub developed here in the Northeast. Our goal is, our concept that we've advanced to the Department of Energy would see hydrogen being produced with green sources, such as the offshore wind resources that we have access to off of our coasts, and to use it to help to reduce emissions from some hard to decarbonize sectors, such as long distance transportation, for example. So there's a lot of promise here, but between the offshore wind generation and, let's say, the long distance trucking fueling station, you need those technologies in between that will be able to transport and produce the hydrogen from those green sources and to deliver it to the end users that we want to have access to it. So that's where fuel cells come in. It's a really bright future. And of course, the fuel cells leaders here in Connecticut are no strangers to the Department of Energy and have been working closely with the Department of Energy's fuel cell and hydrogen programs for many years. So I think that puts us in a really advantageous place when it comes to competing. And it is a national competition for this hydrogen hub funding. But I'm just delighted about the partnership that we have with the industry, and I know we're going to put together a really compelling application. So maybe next year I'll come back and we'll have some good news from DOE. But until then, we're working really hard, and we'll be putting our best foot forward.
Sounds so exciting. Katie, I'm going to come to the end of our program, and any comment. This is, the climate change has no borders, state borders or even global borders, And the United Nations Climate Change Conference, a lot of countries are also seeing the bad side of climate risk and all that, flooding, in Pakistan recently,
Yes.
devastating the livelihood
Tragic.
of so many people, and it's a major challenge, not just one country, around the world. And what is your comment with regard to our state and our country with regard to that, the climate risk is borderless around that. So what should be our responsibility as to find information and share with the rest of the world, and not just within our country, 50 states and all that, and then educate people more into the problem that is at hand.
Yeah,
right?
people often say to me, "Well, Commissioner Dykes, like we're a small state, right? You're asking Connecticut to take on a lot. You want us to adopt these really ambitious targets and drive all these all this investment by these impossible deadlines to tackle what's a global, a problem of planetary scale. And we're just a small state, a couple million people. Why? How can Connecticut really make a difference?
Yeah.
We're just a drop in the ocean when it comes to global carbon emissions." And the reason I care so deeply about Connecticut taking these steps, the reason why I am proud to be working in Connecticut on these issues, is because I know that a state like Connecticut, when we tackle these challenges, we show what's possible. And our leadership resounds way beyond our borders. Whether, it's showing, making the first investments, we've led in terms of the quantity of our electric supply that's going to be coming from offshore wind. We were one of the first states to adopt our renewable portfolio standard, our energy efficiency programs 2 decades ago. Leaders in microgrids, the first green bank in the country here in Connecticut, established in 2011, showing how we can leverage private capital to with public dollars to tackle clean energy and energy efficiency. We've been leaders in so many things, and when we lead, then others can point to our model and say, it's not, these problems that sound so challenging in the abstract. Here's a state that has actually proven come with a model of how we can tackle it, and that is how we lead and have an impact way beyond on global emissions. That's way beyond just the energy consumption and the greenhouse gas emissions, in our humble corner of the universe. Plus, it's not just about leading through public policy. It's about leading through entrepreneurship and through technology innovation and through business models, whether we're talking about fuel cell innovation or the manufacturer EVSE that I was mentioning that's designing public EV charging equipment. We are a state of innovators and engineers. The precision manufacturing base of employment here in our state, the amount of innovation that's happening every day in our state is really reflected in design of new technologies that are solving problems and can help to solve problems like climate change on a global scale. And I love to see Connecticut companies being at the forefront of tackling these issues, because when we create a policy environment that creates demand for decarbonization technologies, and we can be a test bed to show how it works, right? And that there's a market for it. That then enables companies here in Connecticut to then grow and access markets way beyond our borders while keeping, the investment and the economic benefit here at home. So we've been proud to partner with Advanced CT and with many of the incubators that are popping up around the state, with Connecticut Innovations and the Department of Economic and Community Development, because I want to see Connecticut's carbon policies not only help us tackle emissions within our borders, but create jobs and technologies and business models that are exportable to solve these problems on a global scale. And that's, again, another important way that Connecticut's policy commitments can translate way beyond our borders. The federal government right now has an enormous amount of funding that's available. There's a real push to onshore a lot of the decarbonization technology and manufacturing that we've been importing from China and from other countries over the years. And that's really created a critical a very critical moment for us here in Connecticut, whether it's battery recycling, manufacturing, or recycling of other, or recovery of other critical materials, or designing the next generation of efficient photovoltaics or long duration storage. there's no reason why Connecticut can't be tapping into R&D funds, loan guarantee program dollars from the Department of Energy, as well as some of the competitive funding for onshoring manufacturing. There's so many exciting applications for new technology that the Biden administration is really pushing forward. And I love to see Connecticut sort of at the forefront of receiving those dollars and supporting innovation and exportable business models here as well. So we're really excited. It's there's a lot to do, but it's a great state to work in, and I'm really proud of what we're accomplishing together here in Connecticut.
Very inspiring conversation, Katie, and fascinating conversation, I must say. Thank you for coming to our podcast and speaking to us.
Abul, I'm so appreciative of the time to talk with you, and you're a really dynamic person. It's great that you're hosting this podcast, and I'm glad to be connected with your listeners on this critical topic. So thanks for the time.
Thank you. So for our listeners, we have come to the end of this podcast. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and like. Thank you.
The Bridging Connections podcast is brought to you by AI Engineers.